All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andre Gooden, Director of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, welcoming you to the release of the first quarter 2024 Business and Consumer Confidence Indices results. We are reflecting on the previous quarter where business confidence was down a little bit, about 3.9%. The index of current business condition remained stable, and optimism for future business prospects dipped a little bit, while some firms reflected uncertainty about the investment climate for that quarter. Let's see what happens this quarter. Thank you for being a part of our first quarter release. Special recognition to our sponsor, new sponsor, Grace Kennedy Capital Management. Happy to have you on board. Also like to welcome our presenter, Don Anderson, Executive Chairman, Market Research Services Limited. From GK, Kareem Tomlinson, Managing Director from GK Capital, GK Investments. And also other panelists, Dr. Ransford Davison, President of the St. Anne Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Philip Ramson, Managing Director, Chas E. Ramson Limited, also the President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Renaldo Thompson, Vice President, Investment Management and Research of GK Capital Management Limited. Again, welcome. We will have a Q&A section open where we're asking all participants to post their questions, and at the end of the presentations, when we will be having the discussions, you can put your questions in and I will field the questions and direct them to the panelists to answer. So without further ado, I welcome you again. Thank you to GK Capital. Thank you to Market Research Services Limited on behalf of the Chamber. We're now going to invite Mr. Kareem Tomlinson from GK Capital Management Limited, Managing Director, GK Investments, who will, on behalf of the sponsor, present his opening remarks. Good morning, Kareem.
Andre, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Philip Ramson, President, Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, other esteemed members of the Chamber, colleagues, guests, good morning. I am Kareem Tomlinson, Managing Director, GK Investments Limited, and today I'm pleased to be representing GK Capital Management, the title sponsor for today's broadcast of the Business and Consumer Confidence Indices. The Grace Kennedy Group has a long and well-established history of the Chamber, dating back many decades, with a number of Grace Kennedy stalwarts rising to serve in various leadership roles at the Chamber. The names of Grace Kennedy titans such as Francis Papa Kennedy, Jimmy Solomon immediately come to mind. The Chamber of Commerce, for the better part of the last 200 plus years, has played a critical role in supporting, developing, and advocating for the Jamaican business community. Introduction of the Chamber's Business and Consumer Confidence Indices in 2001 and the insights gleaned from these indices have become a welcomed addition to the local economic landscape. The Business and Consumer Confidence Indices serve as a barometer of economic health and provide businesses, policymakers, investors, and stakeholders with crucial insights into the prevailing market conditions. At GK Cap, the investment and brokerage arm of the Grace Kennedy Group, we are huge proponents of the concept that the future is data, and that data will play an ever-increasing role in all critical decision-making for businesses and consumers. However, the challenge is that many emerging markets, such as ours, face is being able to access reliable data readily and continuously. So the work of the Chamber over the years must be applauded, as over the last 25 years, they have been, without fail, producing the Business and Consumer Confidence Indices, which today stands out as a beacon that we as Jamaicans can be very proud of. to call it ours. It was therefore only natural that when the opportunity presented itself for GK-CAP to be able to partner with the Chamber in this way, we grabbed it with both hands. We're looking forward to a long and prosperous partnership, and we're committing to support this nationally important initiative for many, many years to come. Today's session is being hosted under the theme Infrastructure Developments and its Impact on Business. And at GK-CAP, we have an array of products and offerings that support infrastructural development at both the business level and also at the consumer level. Our investment banking team's track record in financing the infrastructure projects is unparalleled. We have successfully raised funding for projects of varying size, scale, and complexity. We have done large-scale power plants that supply the national grid. We have done smaller-scale power plants that supply the energy needs to the clients that we've supported. We have done water treatment plants. We have done airport developments. We have funded road construction, petroleum distribution plants. You name it, we've probably funded it. On the consumer side, we're also excited about a new suite of investment offerings that we will be premiering very soon under the GK Goals banner. Included within this suite is our GK Gold Homeowner Plan, which will allow investors to build customized portfolios that are geared toward supporting them in acquiring what is likely to be their most significant infrastructure asset, their home. So we're very excited about the infrastructure opportunities that we see currently on the horizon, and look forward to the results of the indices and the ensuing discourse, which is to follow. Thank you, Andre. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Kareem Tomlinson, Managing Director, GK Investments. We certainly welcome the participation of the Grace Kennedy Group in this session and as sponsors as well. All right, without further ado, we're going to introduce again, for the umpteenth quarter in a row since 2001, with the help from Professor Curtin, Don Anderson, Executive Chairman, Market Research Services Limited, who at this time will commence the presentation of the first quarter 2024 business and consumer confidence indices. You can open your mic and camera now, Don, and proceed.
Let me talk to you through the first quarter of 2024. We, as Andre indicated earlier on, we have had a pretty smooth period leading from the fourth quarter of 2023 into the first quarter of 2024. What we find is that the number of changes that we anticipated going through the period probably haven't materialized. And what we find is that the period first quarter of 2024 has been pretty stable. There's been hardly any change, so to speak, between the fourth quarter of 2024 and the fourth quarter of 2023. So what we want to do is to go through with our presentation. So just to repeat, when we look at the first quarter results for 2024, we note that there has been very little change between the fourth quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024. In fact, that is pretty level in terms of the consumer confidence. And when we come to the business confidence, we'll also see that those numbers hardly changed. In fact, we're talking about less than 1 percentage point movement in consumer confidence between the first quarter of 2024 and the fourth quarter of 2023. We want to look at some of the specific variables that account for that position. Let us look first of all at how the consumers view current business conditions. When we look at the fourth quarter in 2023, 18.5% of the consumers thought that current business conditions were good. But that fell substantially in the first quarter of 2024 to 10.3 percentage point. Now, where does that take us in terms of the comparison year to year? When we look at the first quarter in 2023, 20.4% of the consumers felt that current business conditions were good. And that now has fallen to 10.3 percentage points in the first quarter of 2024. So that's a dramatic fall off in terms of how consumers view current business conditions. Now, current business conditions obviously has a bearing on how consumers view the current job situation. When we look at this, we also note that there has been really no change in how they view current business condition, current jobs. Jobs have never, as far as the consumer is concerned, been plentiful, never been plentiful. And hence, when we look at this, 10% of the consumers that we interview say that jobs are plentiful. Only 10%. Now, that of course is something that is a cause for concern, because what drives the economy is how people feel about their job situation. But consumers are saying, we don't think jobs are plentiful. They've never ever felt that jobs are plentiful. And in this situation, the level of consumers, the number of consumers who say that jobs are plentiful remains basically the same throughout. So we want to look at how they see current business conditions. What are they talking about? Expected business conditions? Well, you know, they view things from their own perspective, how they see their own fortunes evolving. And when we ask them about current business conditions, there's hardly any change really between the last quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024. So what about expected business conditions? Do they expect business conditions to improve or what? Do we expect it to get better? Well, between the fourth quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024, there's really hardly any difference. There's a 1.1% change in the number of consumers who believe that expect business conditions to get better. When we compare that to 2023 first quarter, we note that 29.8% of the consumers felt that business conditions would get better, expected business conditions to get better. So in a sense, it is higher than it was in the first quarter of 2023, but compared to the last quarter of 2023, there's really only a marginal improvement in that situation. So again, when we look at expected jobs as a result of that, so we look first of all at current business conditions, how they feel about current business conditions. We now look at how they expect business conditions to move. Do they expect improvements? Do they expect business to be better or what? And we see here that between the last quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024, there's hardly any change in their expectations in terms of the way the business will move. What about the expected jobs, therefore? Again, we see that consumers are pretty cool about what is likely to happen in terms of jobs. 33.4% expect more jobs to come on stream. This is the first quarter of 2024 data. That is a marginal improvement in the number of persons who felt that, you know, jobs would get more plentiful or less scarce, if you wish, in the fourth quarter of 2023. So there's really hardly any change. We're talking about minuscule percentages here, right? So what about your household income then? Against the background of what we have seen so far, how they view current business conditions. We're talking about the consumers, how they view current business conditions, how they view expected business conditions. Really, we wouldn't expect them to be talking significantly about improvements in their household income. And so it is, when we look across this particular chart, it says between the first quarter of 2023 down to the fourth quarter of the same year, 2023, to the first quarter of 2024, there's hardly any change. There's no real change in the number of consumers who expect to have an increase in household income. 49.7% as against 49.8% in the fourth quarter of 2023. So consumers aren't really hoping at this point in time for significant improvements in either business or in terms of their own situation, whether it be from a job perspective or as a result from a household income perspective. So what impact, therefore, is this likely to have on their plans to purchase? It's a variable that we have been plotting for quite some time because it's an indication of how free the consumer feels his mind to be. So what about plans to purchase, therefore? We can see that here in the first quarter of 2024, 14.9% of them indicated that they would be purchasing, the purchase intent is 14.9% compared to 15.7% in the fourth quarter. Now we have to remember that the fourth quarter of 2023, obviously the Christmas period where people are a little bit more buoyed in terms of making purchases and so on. Bear in mind also we look at, vacations, we look at cars, and we look at, houses as the variables against which we measure this plan to purchase intent. So we're saying that there's hardly any change anticipated in consumers' purchase intent. They're saying, well, we haven't seen, the economy is not, likely to grow significantly. Current business conditions aren't moving rapidly. And therefore, in terms of our own purchase intent, we are pretty kind of stagnant. We haven't really seen or had any intent to move the situation forward. So that's pretty flat as well. All right. Now, there are a number of persons who believe that business conditions are going to get better in the next 12 months. It was relatively low. So what we did then is to ask them, what are the factors that are accounting for this kind of perception you have of current business conditions? So we had in the first quarter of 2024, 27.8% who expected business conditions to get better, compared to 27.2% in the fourth quarter of 2023. Again, no change. So we're looking right across the board so far. In looking at the situation, consumers are pretty much, almost unmoved in terms of their perception of the economy, perception of the way in which their own situation will change. And now in terms of business conditions, same number expect business conditions to be better as it was in the fourth quarter of 2023. So we can see the factors that are playing out here. Why do you say business conditions are likely to be better? Being optimistic. They're really not holding on to anything concrete in this particular situation, but they're saying we're more optimistic that it will change. So that's the hope rather than anything else. Secondly, people are saying the economy is showing signs of improvement. Good. Entrepreneurship is on the rise. New investment coming in. And we can see that there have been seen some growth in some sectors, and we know that they're talking about tourism primarily and construction. But these are the reasons why they say that they believe that business conditions are going to get better in the next 12 months. But we note that it is less than a third of the persons that we interviewed who believe that business conditions will get better. So there's some who said business conditions are going to get worse. And although the number who said so in the first quarter of 2024 is marginally less than those who said so in the fourth quarter of 2023, this is not a particularly great piece of information to be reporting on, because it says that more persons are actually expecting the economy to worsen than those who expect it to get better. So what are their basic reasons for saying so? One, not surprisingly, they talk in terms of the high cost of living. We will see later on where they talk in terms of a significant increase in prices over last year, which obviously is impacting their ability to spend and to buy things on a day-to-day basis. Lack of employment. So the high cost of living on one hand, lack of employment, and we're talking about increase in crime and lack of disposable income, and the fact that they don't believe the government is assisting enough. So these are the key factors that they speak to in terms of, what are the drivers as far as they are concerned of the factors that cause them to believe the economy is going to get worse in the next 12 months. All right. So here's one of the reasons why. We asked them, well, what about prices of items that you normally purchase compared to this time last year? 64% of all persons said prices have increased significantly, as against 26% who say prices have increased moderately. So we have 9 out of every 10 persons, and this is a very telling number, 9 out of every 10 persons who say they have been faced with increased prices over the last year. And that has impacted A, their ability to plan forward in terms of purchase intent, but 2, to give them this feeling that the economy is not likely to get better over the next 12 months, or that more people believe the economy is going to get worse over the next 12 months and those who believe it is going to get better over the next 12 months because they've been faced with substantial price increases associated with goods that they buy on a regular basis. So this is a question that is something that we need to note very carefully, because the key factors emerge not only here in the consumers, but amongst the business sector. So we asked them a pretty open-ended question. We said, so what is the most critical issue that you believe needs to be addressed urgently, taking into consideration all you have said before, how you feel about current business conditions, your expectations about business conditions, your own situation going forward? What is the most critical issue that you see need to be addressed urgently? 59% of the persons volunteered that crime and violence was the most critical issue that needs to be addressed urgently. Next, unemployment at 17%. And between those two, obviously, 3 out of every 4 persons believe that between crime, which is the predominant factor, and unemployment, these are the things that government and the whole sector, whole social sector and community needs to address right now. Crime and violence, 59%. We may note and we may need to take some comfort from the fact that this was an 11 percentage point dip from what it was in the fourth quarter of 2023. So it's not that crime is no longer a concern. It is probably less of a concern, but it is still significantly the most important factor, the most critical issue that people feel needs to be addressed immediately. Note that unemployment is at 17%, representing an 8 percentage point increase over the fourth quarter of 2023. But together, we can see that these are the issues that policymakers and implementers need to look at, because these are the key factors that people identify spontaneously, voluntarily, as the critical issues that need to be addressed urgently for us to make a change. Now, how does this compare to last year? We look at, the question that we followed this up was, okay, so these are the critical issues, but do you anticipate a change, for example, in the level of crime over the next 12 months? 53% said they expect it to get worse, which is also a not comfortable piece of information to report on. But if you want to take some comfort, this is 7 percentage points down from what it was in the fourth quarter of 2023, because at that point in time, 60% of all persons felt that crime was going to get worse, against the background of the fact that 70% felt crime was the most important and most critical issue to be dealt with at that point in time. So soft comfort maybe, but we're talking in terms of a reduction in the emphasis on crime as a critical issue, but crime is still the most important issue to be dealt with. All right. Now, we want to move on to what people think should be done to arrest this apparent decline, to arrest this challenge that we have in terms of crime. And so what do you think should be done? Again, totally spontaneous, open-ended question, and we simply polled and accumulated and calculated the responses that they gave to us. Not surprisingly, emphasis is on the youth. More jobs for young people, 43%. Better paying jobs for the youth, 38%. And between those two, we want to combine them. And there's over 80% of the persons that we interviewed said that, you know, some focus would need to be placed on the youth in terms of jobs by itself and better paying jobs for young people. Programs for the unemployed. So what they're doing is actually, in a way, marrying, combining, relating these challenges to the overall crime situation. And we need to take note of the kinds of proposals and suggestions that they're making for an amelioration of these factors. More stringent penalties and fines for crimes, clamping down on corruption. So people are talking in terms of the factors that they believe are driving this high incidence of crime and violence in the society. Unemployment, obviously, and young people need to be focused on in order to change that kind of mindset and get us back to a level where it's less damaging and less complexity, problematic in terms of issues that we have to deal with. People talk about bringing back capital punishment, better policing, and so on. But these are the items, these are the areas, these are the key factors that they're talking about as likely ameliorative measures that could be applied to dealing with the situation that we are facing, this monster that we are in fact facing. So we delve further into the whole confidence that we're now identifying a number of sectors. And we ask them, well, what do you feel about changes, positive changes in each of these sectors, each of these areas that we face every day as we go through in this beautiful country? So what are the things that they're talking about? And if we look to the extreme right, where we talk in terms with those two shades of green, we can see where people are concerned. All right, because very few expect any significant change in roadways, in the police, for example, in the water system. So these are the key factors that they're most skeptical about. And we may conversely, therefore, what are the factors that they have greatest hope in? And they're talking about, for example, things like the education sector. They're talking about the small business sector, but they have really little expectation that there will be positive change in terms of what our roads look like, what our water situation look like, and in fact, the police force. There are very little expectation that things will improve significantly in any of these areas, right? So one of the big concerns that we have is technology and AI and how this is likely to impact the job situation. So those who are employed, we ask them, well, how do you feel? Do you think that technology, the advances in technology will impact you? And we're seeing that at the moment, there's not a great degree of concern that technology will replace jobs, not a great degree of concern. We can see that 8% feel that their job is strongly likely to be replaced by technology. 13% probably. So we're saying 1 in every 5 believe that their job is under threat from technology, but this is not a large number, but still something that needs to be noted going forward, because there is a sense of urgency in terms of moving towards a greater appreciation of AI and the implications for job security. So we need to note these numbers. Where are people going in terms of the things that are likely to be technology areas that they're likely to be driving towards? And we can see very much like last quarter, it's more apps on mobile devices, greater use of mobile devices of various kinds, more online banking, more online shopping, and so on. And least of all, online healthcare facilities. But these are the kinds of priorities that they see themselves drifting towards as they embrace more and more technology. So if you had disposable income and you had enough to place somewhere, where would you place it? And we can see very much like the fourth quarter 2023, that commercial banks top the list of places that they would be prepared to invest their money in, followed by credit unions, real estate, in a business, keeping the money at their house. There's still 8% who believe that this is the best thing to do. Building societies, investments, and so on. And 11% either don't intend to save or do not have the capacity to save. But where they would go would be the commercial banks, first and foremost, credit unions, real estate, and we can see the range going down to 5% in stocks and bonds, right? We'll come to this whole issue of remittances, and we've seen a steady decline, so to speak, in the number of households that are receiving remittances every year, from a high of 38% of households across the island in 2016, down to 2022, where we had 26% of households receiving remittances. That number is now 27%. So it is leveled off over the last 3 years, so to speak. And of course, a lot of this is driven by what is happening in the more developed markets from which much of our remittance comes. And therefore, we can see we're not anywhere near the peak of 2016 at 38%. And what this does is impact significantly the ability of persons, particularly so, but not exclusively so, particularly so in the low, middle, and low incomes, to meet their daily household expenses. Because when we ask the question, which we normally do, well, how do you spend? How do you deal with remittances? Very little of this goes towards anything except meeting daily household expenses. So obviously the correlation between what they're receiving in terms of remittances and their ability to basically exist on a day-to-day basis are related. Fewer households are now receiving remittances, and as a result, we find that these are the things that impact things like their ability to spend on a daily basis and their ability also to invest, or their ability to increase their purchase intent any at all. Okay. I want to shift quickly now to the business side, and we can see that, like the consumer side, business confidence has really just kind of been stable over the last 2 quarters. Very stable. There's been a less than a 1 percentage point positive movement, and this is really nothing much to speak of. And we therefore need to note again very much that in the first quarter of the year, this year, the confidence level for both business and consumer has really just been stable compared to the previous quarter, 2024, 2023, fourth quarter, right? So let's drill down some more, therefore, into the factors as we did. We can just take, first of all, a look at where we are in terms of business confidence. We can see that we peaked in 2019 based on this 5-year band of evaluation. We peaked at 143.6, the index was. We dipped 2020 to 120, moved up gradually, slowly to 124.9 in 2021, and began to pick up with in a way, the kind of recession in COVID to 137 in 2022, and we're up to 140 basically at the end of 2023. So where are we now? We're pretty much at the same position as we were. We started the year in the same position as we ended 2023. So there's really absolutely no change in business confidence, and that is reflected in the first quarter data compared to fourth quarter of 2023. Okay, so let us look at some of the variables that build into that then. Current profit. How do businesses look at their current profit situation? Is it better than expected? Is it as expected or worse than expected? We look at the data. In 2023 first quarter, 20.2% felt that business profit was better than expected. That number in the first quarter of 2024 is down to 18 percentage points, and down significantly from the last quarter of 2023 at 26.3 percentage points. So businesses aren't, overly excited about profit expectation. It's down to 18 percentage points now. That's the number of businesses who expect that their profit will be better than expected. 67% expected to be just as expected, or intend and feel that it will be no better than they expect it to be. So again, you may want to take comfort from the fact that that's the 10 percentage point jump from 2023 fourth quarter to first quarter of 2024, 10 percentage point. But is this comforting? I don't think so, because we need to bear in mind that really you want your profit to be better than expected. But if you wish, you could take comfort from the fact that 67%, an increase of 10 percentage points, believe that, profits are what we expected. Now, that can be read so many different ways, all right? What about investment and expansion? We know that 62% of the businesses that we interviewed, and we should mention, first of all, that we should have mentioned, we interviewed 110 businesses and we interviewed over 630 consumers. So this is the frame and the basis from which we're looking at all this data. 62% of the businesses. Well, the market, the environment is conducive to investment, which is a substantial increase from the fourth quarter of 2023, where 54%. So there's been an 8 percentage point improvement in that number, which is again worth noting. So that despite the fact that there's been a reduction in the number of businesses who expect their profits to have been better than that it turned out to be, this is an environment which suggests that businesses are still investment inclined, still expansion inclined, and it is worthy to note that businesses are always in there for the long run, of course. And a dip in their fortunes doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to throw their hands up. They have not shown that. They've shown a great degree of resilience. And certainly there is a great anticipation that the economy will improve. And as a result, they're suggesting that it's a good time to expand and to invest one business. So that's a comforting piece of information, if you wish, against the background of the fact that the confidence level hasn't really changed over the last period. What about the firm's finances? Saying, well, we anticipate improvement in the firm's finances as a result of what we believe are things that we will put in place. 71.7%, 72% said, yes, we expect it will improve, as against 66% in the fourth quarter of 2023. This, of course, is down, as we note, on the first quarter of 2023. But still at the same point, same time, you want to take comfort from the fact that there's been an improvement over the last period of some 5 percentage points. And this is worthy to note that firms are still in a pretty optimistic vein, still an optimistic frame of mind. And it is worthy to note that this is something that will augur well for how they go forward in terms of their own business expansion and plans for the future, certainly looking at 2024. What about their profit situation? Here again, we see a slight fall off in how they view the whole situation. But again, it's not a huge difference to be concerned about necessarily, but to be noted. And it's really, heartening that businesses, against the background of what challenges have been experienced over the last 3 years of COVID, that they're still in a pretty optimistic and positive mood and frame of mind. So that's something, again, that we need to note. So how do they feel about the economy? Hardly any change. 41.5% in first quarter of 2024 compared to 41.3% in the first quarter year to date, 44% in the fourth quarter of 2023. So hardly any change in this particular situation. All right. And again, it just is playing out this whole thing that both businesses and consumers are pretty much, at the moment, stable in terms of how they view the economy and how they view their own situation. And at least one would like to say there's been no significant decline in confidence. There's actually been a slight improvement in confidence. And these are the factors that are helping to shore up this kind of confidence level. So 42%, and we note this is significantly better than the consumers. 42% believe that business conditions are going to get better over the next 12 months. And businesses are generally, based on all that we've looked at over the years, generally more confident long-term than consumers have been, because they tend to look at everything right in front of their faces, consumers do. 42% believe that business conditions are going to get better in 2024, compared to 44% in the fourth quarter of 2023. So what are the bases on which they are putting forward this positive outlook on businesses? One, they see the economy recovering. Two, some sectors will improve the economy. Three, they're pretty optimistic about government policies coming into play and impacting how they see businesses, rolling out this year. Spending power, they believe that more persons will have spending power, greater spending power, more disposable income, and this will obviously feed back into their own revenue and productivity. And they believe that they expect opportunities to arise after a recession, after kind of relatively stagnant business flow that we had with the onset of COVID. So these are the principal factors that they have identified as critical determinants of their own view that business conditions will get better. And 4 out of 10 businesses felt this way. All right. Note, a smaller number of persons felt that business conditions would worsen. Again, this is something that probably doesn't translate into greater confidence in terms of the indices, but it is clear that businesses are saying, we're going through difficult times, we're seeing some shifts, but we believe that things are going to improve over the next 12 months. And that was evidenced by that 40% who believe that business conditions will get better. We now need to stack that against the 19% who believe that business conditions will get worse, which is down from 22%. So again, this is a positive indicator because in the fourth quarter of 2023, 22% felt business conditions would worsen, but this is down to 19% in the first quarter of 2024. Again, a small but tangible indicator that businesses are becoming more and more optimistic. And we probably don't want to use confidence too much because the confidence level hasn't really changed in terms of the indices, but in terms of their outlook on the situation, businesses are a little bit more positively inclined at this point in time. Those are the factors that are driving this level of positives. Okay, so we look at a very important piece of information here. We've been plotting which sectors they believe and which sectors will be more inclined to spend money in terms of infrastructure, in terms of improvement to their business practices and so on. And we can see that the big jump in this particular first quarter of 2024 has been amongst service sector, personal care. That we note has been a pretty volatile sector. It is comprised of things like hairdressers and barbers and beauty salons and so on. And we know that in 2022, 75% of them said that this is where we're going to be actually making improvements to our infrastructure. That fell to 49% in 23, but in the first quarter of 2024, that shot up to 90%. So it's a pretty volatile sector. But against that background, we need to look at those that are probably more stable in terms of that movement. And we certainly want to identify things like farming and agriculture, construction and installation, transport, storage and communication, and in fact, tourism and hospitality as the bulwark of those segments that say that's where we're going to be spending money. This is where we're going to be improving our infrastructure and actually expanding our investment climate. So, what are the problems? What are the factors that have impacted your ability to do more in terms of expansion? And again, very much like we did with the consumers, we asked them to tell us what these were, and we captured the verbatim comments. So these are their responses to the question as to what factors are impacting your ability to do more, expand more. High input costs, 22%. Volunteer that information. 21% lack of funding or access to finance. And I'm sure they're talking about easier access to finance. Shortage of qualified skilled labor. A lot of companies are reporting that there seems to be a pool of people outside, but we just don't seem to be able to find good people to work, and there's a talk about importing labor. Well, 16% say that there's a shortage of qualified skilled labor. 13% talk about the cost of foreign exchange. 10% cite crime, high interest rates, logistics getting supplies on time. So here we're talking about the supply chain challenges and so on. So the top factors that are impacting how people or businesses look at their own expansion situation now: high input costs, topping the list, lack of funding, access to finance, shortage of qualified skilled labor, cost of foreign exchange, and crime being the top 5 to be noted. And we can see what changes. There have been negligible changes over the first quarter, the fourth quarter of 2023. So, as far as you're concerned, we asked the business persons, 110 businesses, what is the most critical issue to address urgently? What's the most critical issue? Is there a similarity between what the consumers are saying and what businesses are saying? Most definitely. 52%, the majority of the businesses that we interviewed say that crime and violence is the most critical issue to address urgently. This is down by 3 percentage points over the fourth quarter. But again, this is only a negligible change. What else is there? Everything else pales in comparison to crime and violence as a critical issue to address urgently. 8% said inflation, 7% unemployment, corruption, some of the same issues that consumers are raising. Most critical issue, and what stands out as a sore thumb is this whole crime and violence issue, which is something that, again, both consumers and businesses feel must be addressed in order for us to see a greater business climate, a better, a more productive business climate. Okay. So we asked the businesses the same question we asked of consumers. So what should be done? Here, the businesses have a slightly different perspective on the solutions to crime. Better policing, 29%. More stringent penalties for crimes, surely. Number 2, 23%. That was one of the top suggestions that consumers gave as well. Programs for the unemployed, more jobs for young people. So again, in these two, businesses are looking at it from the same perspective as the consumer. They're identifying the young people and the unemployed as critical ingredients in driving solutions and ameliorations to this whole monster of crime and violence. So we can see the range of things that they identified, all the way down to fixing the economy 1%, divine intervention, instill discipline in the society. These are relatively small numbers, but they identify and mention a range of factors that they believe can be applied, can be implemented in order to fix the crime and violence problem. So where do you expect, where's the sort of confidence going in terms of a number of sectors that we identify? Virtually the same ones that we gave them in terms of the consumers. Small business sector, do you expect your confidence in each of these to grow or to get worse? And again, we can see virtually the same kinds of sectors. When we look at 10% are extremely confident that things will change in terms of the government's handling of situations. 10% health services, they're very skeptical, very few people. And what are the biggest challenges again in terms of what impediments, blockages they see in terms of growing confidence in each of these sectors? We're talking about the water supply. We're talking about the transport system. We're talking about the roads. They really have little confidence or not sufficient confidence that these things will be significantly improved over the next 12 months. So there's a concern amongst the businesses as well, and they aren't dissimilar to the concerns that the consumers expressed in terms of each of these sectors that we looked at. Okay. So where are you going in terms of your expansion? Let us look at technology now. What are you likely to be doing on spending money on in terms of technology? 43% said social media advertising. Very much the same situation as it was in the fourth quarter. It's up by 8 percentage points, but social media advertising was certainly the number one area that they intended to channel their resources in terms of technology. New customized software, 32%. This is up 17 percentage points. So it was not the number 2 factor in the fourth quarter of 2023. Electronic payment solutions for customers and suppliers, 23%. New hardware, virtual security system, GPS technology, artificial intelligence, 11%. 3% solar energy. So we can see exactly where businesses are kind of focused in terms of their technology changes and expansion. Top in the list, just to repeat, social media advertising at 43% and new customized software, 32%, representing the top 2 factors that they intend to use to drive their businesses. That was the last of the charts that I wanted to go. I've gone through pretty quickly because we had so many charts to deal with, but I hope that everybody, the audience, has in fact been able to absorb much of what has been said, because it's been a fair amount of data to capture in a 30-minute segment. So here we are, over again to you, Andre. Thanks very much for listening to me, audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don. You can stop sharing. Thank you very much. Excellent. Excellent. Very comprehensive presentation. And I know you have constant supply of data that we could draw on. I noticed that, I mean, the crime and violence thing is still very prevalent, as it has been. That is consistent. But as we speak of infrastructure, which we will shortly, despite the government's heavy investment in infrastructure, and the transportation network, roads, water, and buildings especially, both businesses and consumers are not optimistic of any better returns from those investments in the short term, which is pretty significant. Thank you very much again, Don, and certainly please keep your ears open because I expect some questions will be coming your way as well, and I see some coming up in the chat already. But to the panelists now, first, Ronaldo, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. The research that Don has presented here in terms of how both businesses and consumers are reacting to the economy. I know you have your own research being done. Is it as consistent this year versus last year as has been represented by the persons Don has spoken to? Oh, Don, before you answer the question, Ronaldo, I remember, Don, that we do have quite a few new participants online. Could you just tell them about your survey size in terms of businesses and consumers, just to give everybody a perspective?
Sure. Thanks very much, Andre, for reminding me that I had not mentioned this at the outset.
Yes.
Yes. We had 2 segments, consumers and businesses. And for the consumer segment, we interviewed approximately 638 persons across the island in a nationally representative sample, so that we're able, from that 638 persons, to project the data up to the total population. With regard to the business sector, we interviewed 110 businesses of various industry types. So again, it gave us a good basis from which we could project that data up to the business community island-wide. So that's the respective samples for each of the 2 segments. And all of these were completed using our normal procedure for interviewing, analysis, and presentation of our reports, and which is pretty consistent with what we've been doing over the last 22 years. So the sample size hasn't really changed since we started. And from that perspective, it's been a pretty consistent way for us to monitor and to look at the trends over the period. 638 persons interviewed and 110 businesses.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don. So Ronaldo, what are you seeing here? Is this consistent with what you are seeing in your businesses and how your consumers are actually reacting to the initiatives within the group?
Right. Morning. Can you hear me? You hearing me well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. So thanks again, Andre. And Don, I think it was a wonderful presentation, and I know you have a room full of data from which you actually pull a subset and share with us. But I think the outcome of the findings or outcome of your research is really telling. And to your question, Andre, how we actually see it is that we like to look at it from a trend perspective. Because the truth is, if you look at it, we're still below the highs of 2019, but we certainly have been recovering, just based on the data that Don is presenting, right? And it ties in well with the other information or the other economic indicators that we have. If you think about it, the macroeconomic data or indicators that we have are generally doing well. I mean, if you're an economic bird flying over Jamaica, you'll think that this is a good place to land. The truth is, that's a perspective also of the 3 rating agencies and the IMF as well, right? So and so their assessment of the economy generally is saying that we're doing well, and even the path that we're on seems to be a good one. And so we're on a path of sustained growth from a macro perspective, right? But one of the things that the research point out, which is also true, is that the benefits of the gain aren't even across our sector, our segments of our economy or of our society. And so there's a lot more that we can do to even out that the gains of the gains that we're achieving from economic growth, as well as to accelerate it. And the things that we can do more of is to have greater involvement of private firms and households, right? Greater involvement of them in our economic action. And it's for that reason, that's why the business and consumer confidence is so important. Because what is showing us is that if you look at the trend, is that the confidence has been increasing. And it's that increased business confidence that we want to see that can drive or unearth the entrepreneurial spirit, which is what we really want. And because those spirit is the actions of the firm to expand, to continuously invest is what will cause more economic growth and absorb more labor in the process. And in doing that, you find that, the benefits start to spill over. And one of the things I don't want to add here is, just the whole action of firms investing more in their businesses for expansion. Those are some of the type of things that GK Capital is seeing and is willing and able to help with the firms. So if you talk about some of the things that we're seeing, that's one of the things that we're seeing. We're seeing more businesses seeking capital to expand their business and to access to deepen their penetration in the markets that they do serve. And even from the consumer perspective as well, some of the things that we're seeing is that, again, the trend is important. And what is important from the trend is that the consumer confidence is improving. And that is so important because the improved confidence suggests that, there's greater optimism about the future. And once people start feel optimistic about the future, then they start to plan. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more persons planning for the future, planning for aspirations, the goals that they have in the future. And those goals probably relate to education for their children, buying a house, and that kind of thing, which the GK Mutual Fund, again, can help to as a vehicle to help them to get those things across. So the results that done is sharing with us today, I think is very, very vital. And I think we should look at it in terms of the trend, how things have been developing primarily since 2020. And I think we're on a good path.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo Thompson, VP Investment and Research at GK. There are some other questions coming in, which I'll come back to shortly. But Dr. David Smith, President of the St. Ann Chamber of Commerce, could you just share with us what you heard from Don? Is that what the chamber's membership is echoing, or are there any deviations from that based on where you are on the ground?
Thank you, Andrea, and commendations to Don on such a profound presentation, which is indicative that the indices suggest a level of stability across the board. Based on the findings, it also suggests a level of correlation with the feelings and mood on the ground from various businesses across multiple sectors based on engagement and interaction, particularly as it relates to the realized increase in the index of current business conditions at above the 3% range. And I believe that this is also suggestive of the increased confidence in the climate for investment and expansion, as mentioned by Don, for example, in the parish of St. Ann, where we're currently experiencing significant growth and development in critical sectors. We could mention for example, the expansion of the tourism sector. For example, Sandals reopened its doors in Dunn's River, thereby creating value-added niche to the booming tourism product in St. Ann. We are seeing a significant rise to housing stocks with the aggressive introduction of new housing developments across the parish, which correlates with the approximate 9% increase reported by Don in the proportion of firms, convinced that it's a good time to invest. And I mean, all of a sudden, too, the parish has risen to the top as the entertainment mecca in Jamaica, attracting both locals and internationals. So I think this is really aligning with the signals that Don has outlined to us. We're seeing the emergence of new industries, the BPO sector in Miami Bay, employing over 500 individuals, as well as the opening of new businesses, new entrepreneurs coming on board, the pending expansion of the road infrastructure. So all of those align to the level of stability that we're seeing across the numbers presented by Don. Nevertheless, I believe the stability caution lingers as we grapple with arresting issues, such as, one of the pain points, the increase in crime, the high cost of living. These are some of the general feedback coming from the business on the ground, which impacts disposable income and spend. Of course, required continued policy intervention to sustain and to grow results. We could also mention, the increase in road traffic accidents that are also now a concern and could also have potential future impact on the indices. We also mentioned, for example, the impact of large-scale capital projects on smaller players in the tourism sector, such as the guest houses, the motels, craft vendors, and how we develop a sustainable ecosystem and linkages to ensure stronger integration and distribution of benefits in those sectors. And we could also mention access to capital and other resources for those smaller businesses to remain competitive. So I think the numbers really correlate strongly with what we're seeing, what we're feeling on the ground, based on our engagement with the businesses, and that level of stability as reported. I think, Andre, is very evident on our side.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Coming back to you shortly. Ronaldo, there's a question in the chat about monetary policy that I'm going to give to you shortly. But before that, Mr. Philip Ramson, Managing Director of JCC Ramson in the fast-moving consumer goods business and also President of the Jamaica Chamber. Could you just make a comment on the results that Don has presented in terms of businesses and consumers and your own experience as a businessman and how your consumers are reacting? Are you sharing that same sentiment? It seems that businesses, as usual, tending to think more long-term, seem to be a little more optimistic. Consumers in the short term seem a little bit uncertain.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. It was a very enlightening presentation, by the way. Don, thanks for that information. Quite a lot there to unpack. I view similar view as what I saw in the report. I think that generally businesses are confident in the future and in what we see in the economy. I did note in that I saw, even though the confidence may not have increased, the persons who were concerned, or I would say I thought it would worsen, had decreased. So to me, that is a signal that about it. So I took a positive approach as it looked at those who were thinking it would worsen. I did notice that a big concern was unemployment. And a large part of that is not just unemployment, but finding jobs that are paying better. I have noticed that within our industry that there's a lot of movement that is going on amongst people, not just upward movement, but lateral movements, jumping from one company to the other, hoping to find some upward mobility, because obviously they feel that the standard of living has increased and they're needing to finding ways to increase their income. I did take note that the increase in interest for entrepreneurism has gone up, which is positive on there. I think we need to find productivity and growth within the entrepreneurial sector, so that I think those small businesses are where we're going to go. As it relates to the infrastructure, Andre, I mean, I think we can all know that there's been some major improvement in some of the infrastructure, so much so that it actually is creating some bottlenecks into these towns. So, I mean, if you look I mean, naturally, the highway over to the North Coast has created a lot of our ability for people to transfer both between Ocho-Rios and Kingston, but of course, creates bottlenecks. So we need to find a solution that when we're improving that infrastructure, we improve the infrastructure within those communities. You know, I mean, I think infrastructure in general obviously stimulates economies, so I'm grateful for it. But we have to consider the ripple effects that it has, and in particular, the towns that it's bypassing. How are those towns being affected, and how can we include them? Because the overall goal for improvement in infrastructure is economic inclusion. So and that's me wearing my JCC hat, and I want to make sure that we understand that the national goal is economic inclusion, more cost-effective ways to conduct business from one end of the island to the other. And so I think from that standpoint, we'll have to consider all of those things. I did note that on the survey, roads, but also water was a big concern. I think we need to acknowledge those two. That I know there are some major projects. I see the Rio Cobra project, but you know, there's still a lot of water issues island-wide that needs to be addressed. From that standpoint, if you ask persons in the grill, they'll tell you that there's a major issue with water supply. So I think from those standpoints, we need to look at on those things from an infrastructure. But just my comments on the survey, absolutely consistent with what I'm seeing out there. And I do take note that crime and violence remains the highest point of concern, but also unemployment and finding better employment in terms of salaries. So those are my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Philip. Don, there's a question in the chat before you come in, Ronaldo. Concerning the reading of the report. Laura Levy is asking, please explain the figures in red with a positive sign plus. Does it mean that there's a negative or a positive difference from the last time? Just to clarify that for the...
Yes. Yes, those numbers alongside talk in terms of what the movement has been over the fourth quarter of 2023 into the first quarter of 2024. So we see there have been a downward movement in some, upward movement in others. So it does in fact talk to you in terms of the change, the percentage change over the two periods, of the two quarters.
All right, thank you very much. Ronaldo, the question in the chat relates to, and I noticed yesterday, Statin came out with results that showed that the inflation is currently within the expected band of 4 to 6%. Although it was also forecast that we're going to go beyond that shortly. Before we talk about infrastructure topic, how do the current investment levels move once the central bank reduces policy rates, and have any companies delayed further investment, like yours, for example, in terms of lending or in terms of your own investments, waiting on capital costs to go down? Not hearing you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the question. Well, let's answer. Well, I think there's two. You mentioned two things there. I don't say if I can touch on both, right? One in terms of the inflation. You know, if you just go by the anticipated outcomes based on what the central bank has predicted, that will be in and out of the targeted range, and the targeted range is anywhere between 4 to 6%. The number from Statin released yesterday is welcoming. That's good news for us, right? But the idea is that we might fluctuate, and there's risk that can cause us to be outside of the band going forward as well. But to the point around interest rates and using debt as a source of financing for companies, there's a couple of points I want to mention here, because one of the things that we have seen is that the interest rates, as we have it now, doesn't seem to be too restrictive for firms thinking about expansion. Because what we have seen is that there are still several companies coming to us seeking capital within this environment, within this interest rate environment. So it can be sticky for some companies on the margin, but generally, the rates doesn't seem to be too restrictive to stop the capital formation, right, from firms for firms to invest. But even outside of that, what we're also noticing is that there's also firms, more and more firms are willing to take on private equity and seeking the equity market as a source of raising capital as well. And so, within this environment, I think once firms see opportunities within the market that they serve to expand, they'll find the right capital to use to finance those growth objectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to turn to infrastructure a little bit now. How has the infrastructure development impacted business? Dr. Davidson, I'll start with you. Philip touched on it a little bit in terms of just-in-time delivery and also the major roads versus the subsidiary road network. How has the development of road networks in particular, one, and secondarily, construction impacted the growth of business through the St. Ann Chamber's eyes?
With respect to the road network, currently as is, we recognize that it has been somewhat of an impediment to business. That is due in part to the increase in the population size here in St. Ann and the fact that the road network has not been expanded to align with the level of growth that we are experiencing in St. Ann. So it has been challenging from the perspective of congestion in the towns with respect to motor vehicles traversing the area, persons supplying goods and services, the lane supplying goods and services. So we have seen that level of negative impact aligned to the level of growth, because the road network is not expanding based on the level of growth that's been experiencing. And so that's the sort of response we're getting from business. But nevertheless, there's some level of optimism based on the fact that in the pipeline, the government plans to develop a 4-lane highway on the North Coast. And so, that has somewhat eased some of the concern, but the timeline for that level of expansion will be critical in order to soothe some of the concerns from businesses in the area. So the infrastructure development of the road network is critical. We have also seen, for example, an increase in accidents on the road, and that also speaks to some of the concerns with respect to the congestion on the road network. So the general concern from the businesses, the anticipation is that there will be swift action in developing that 4-lane highway from Montego Bay into Draxall, so that businesses will not be negatively impacted based on what has been experienced on the ground at this point in time, which I think is somewhat reflecting in Don's report.
Right, thank you. Philip, moving goods now from east to west, from north to south to your customers on the main networks would certainly be enhanced. And you spoke to that a little bit. If you could expand a little bit on that and also speak about the tributaries. I mean, you have Christiana, you have Brownstown, you have Claremont, you have all these other regions that are off the beaten path, so to speak. The highway will get you to a certain point, but you also have customers in that neck of the woods who need your goods and services. Has the business benefited from the major road networks, and how has the prospects for the tributary networks impact the business?
Yeah, so from a distribution standpoint, absolutely, you're going to see an improvement in your transportation costs and your time, because getting onto the North Coast now, where we have a distribution center in Montego Bay, we can actually access Ocho quicker from Kingston than shipping the goods to Mobay to then store them and then ship them to Kingston to Ocho. So transportation-wise, you're seeing an improvement time-wise. If you take, for example, St. Thomas, distinct difference between a year ago to now, where it would take you 3 hours to get to Moran Bay as opposed to an hour and a half now. So from a time-wise, absolutely. One of the concerns, and I addressed it earlier, was that as you improve your highways, you then have to consider the effect it has on the small towns, the parochial roads, etc., because those persons are being bypassed now. And as a result, their businesses are being affected. And what you see is you see a movement of people where people are going to move closer to where they can find the business. So they'll move towards there. They'll be able to access the highways from there. But with that movement is going to affect your infrastructure within that town. So you're seeing tremendous growth within these towns that are more accessible from the highways. So a growth to business, but then a concern with the infrastructure not being able to handle it. And you can talk about from technology to healthcare to policing. All of these things are affected when your population grows within and your business grows within a certain industry. So from a distribution standpoint, certain improvement, it has created bottlenecks, which I think the government does have long-term plans. But I do think they have to consider how it's affecting the small businesses and what are the plans to one, keep them inclusive in the economy, but also to improve the infrastructure to where they're going to be moving to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ronaldo, the concerns that came up about in order to reduce crime and in also order to better address some of the employment issues. Wouldn't infrastructure development lead to greater employment, to more employment across the board, at least as the infrastructure projects continue? That is one. And two, the second part is a question in the chat about real estate prices. As the government acquires and otherwise develops infrastructure, there's pressure on real estate prices, commercial and otherwise. How do you see that panning out? Firstly, the employment figures based on capital investment in infrastructure, and two, the second one would be the real estate prices.
Right. Thanks again, Andre, for that. So the truth is, the investment in infrastructure is broad, and it is so massive when it does happen that it really goes to absorbing a lot of labor. You just think about what the highways has done, the North Coast and the more recent ones from St. Thomas to Manchester, absorb a lot of labor. And then you think even further about the urban center that is being built in St. Thomas. You can only imagine what St. Thomas will look like 5 years from now. Maybe they'll get a KFC as well, right? But the truth is, in terms of having investment in infrastructure, it really goes to the heart of economic growth, and is one of the tools or the method that you can use to absorb or to provide employment and increase productivity across the country. And infrastructure investment itself as well is, the nature of it kind of helps with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, if you think about it, the alleviation of poverty and providing certain amenities for the communities, right? So the investment undertaken by the government is important, it's critical. But these investments, as we have it now, are enabling investments. These are enabling investment that tends to have a multiplier effect. It tends to have other businesses and other economic activities that results from it. And so, but the brighter future that we seek for Jamaica really requires even more private sector participation in infrastructure investments. And so there's an increase in desire. If you think about it, there's really an increase in desire for private firms to play a part. If you think about some of the water infrastructure, just being able to provide water, you have more and more players willing to play a part in that. Energy infrastructure is big as well. You have more and more players willing to consider investment in energy creation. So those types of infrastructure projects is a big part of what we're trying to finance here at GK Capital. And we have ideas around creating a pool of capital dedicated to those types of investments, right? Because we know how massive those can be in terms of the impact on the economy. But I just want just to focus a little bit more on the impact of infrastructure on businesses, right? And you can look at it in two parts, really. In the first instance, it's once you have an approval to build a power plant, to build a highway, then you have that first set of businesses who will actually do the design and build. So those companies essentially benefit because the capacity utilization, for example, in a construction company, is now being used up fully. The skills and expertise within those companies are used up, and of course the gains, the economic gains that derive from that for those companies are important. The second aspect of it is after these infrastructure has been built, just how much more efficient it is for existing firms now to find new markets or being able to access markets more easily, which is what Philip spoke to earlier about. Just being able to transport goods from Kingston to Montego Bay is a lot more easier. So the transportation of those goods become easier, but it also provide an avenue for existing firms to supply new markets when these infrastructures are designed and built. So the impact of infrastructure is really big. And the truth is we need more of them at the same time. So we can have that, if you think about a nuclear bomb, that's, it's huge. And can have a real impact on the economy. To the second question around real estate prices, the truth is the demand for real estate has been, for many years, has just been going up. And everybody, some persons say anecdotally, everybody wants a piece of Jamaica, right? I mean, even the people overseas want to own a piece of the island. And for different reasons, right? But the truth is the demand is there. And because the demand is there, the prices for these things will increase, not just for residential properties, but also for commercial properties as well. Because what you find is that you have more and more firms trying to expand and set up hubs in different parts of the island. And so as those firms expand, they have a need to actually own their own plants. And so the demand for real estate in different parts of the island continue to increase. Certainly in Kingston, it move a lot faster. But if you think about what went happen to St. Thomas and the rest of the South Coast, I imagine at some point the prices for those properties would also increase,
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Davidson, given the St. Ann is effectively a service economy. A lot of your population there is in the service sector, tourism particularly. Given the several developments taking place there now, in terms of building, construction, roadwork, etc., do you find that the service sector is losing labor, unskilled labor, let's say, to the construction, or are you importing labor from other parishes into St. Ann to deal with the rapid growth in infrastructure?
And so it's really difficult now to keep up even with the level of expansion that we're seeing in St. Ann. We're seeing significant development right across the board, as you mentioned. So, for example, even in the Roxall area, that's now even being developed like a little Miami. So we're seeing several infrastructural development across the board. And so significant labor is really required. So it's really a mix of labor, which include local as well as imported labor in order to meet the demand that is required in order to take care of the infrastructural development right across the board. Significantly, too, it has impacted the level of employment locally. So, for example, even with the introduction of the BPO in Miami Bay, I was having a discussion recently, and they have employed in excess of 500 individuals. And so those are some of the positive effects that we're experiencing in the parish at this time.
Thank you very much. Philip, what is your thought on, I mean, you say you have a distribution center on the west side of the island. The question concerning the road network is of course, you spoke about the bottlenecks and the challenges with the traffic on the road and road fatalities. How are you going to, how is the business going to deal with this issue? I don't know of many alternate routes, but what are you doing? Are you moving the goods at odd times, 4 o'clock in the morning, etc., whatever, to sort of avoid the bottlenecks that cause not just delays in delivery of goods, but also fatalities on the road? How is the business dealing with that side?
Yeah, so I don't think that there's been a real change in the model. I mean, most companies, when they're shipping goods from one end of the island to the other, they're either loading from the night before or they're leaving at 4 in the morning. So that's consistent. That continues to be the model that has been there. I think that there are plans that for a bypass, in particular through Montego Bay, a bypass from towns like Lucy, that we're looking forward to seeing some of that improvement. But I mean, from a distribution standpoint, the model has really been consistent in the fact that you do get up earlier and ship out earlier. And I think from our industry, which has been fast-moving consumer goods, there has been consistent growth. Retail has been strong. I think the sectors like tourism and have been strong. That has allowed us to grow. That we've actually been implementing shifts so that we can open up earlier and let people off at different times. So, in terms of business has been strong in that respect. That has allowed us to do that. But we do look forward to seeing some continuous growth in infrastructure projects because I think you will see this bottleneck continue to get worse. I know anybody who's going to the North Coast on a weekend will tell you that they look to leave at odd hours as well to avoid that congestion right at the roundabout all the way till Priory. So I think that as we see these things develop and businesses grow out of it, we'll have to continue to pressure the government to find ways to alleviate that.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Davidson, access to capital. How have there been improvements especially for small and medium, which I believe is the core part of our audience in many instances? How has access to capital for general development, because it came up as a business concern on the decisions to expand your business, logistics, access to capital, and input costs, including labor. What have you seen in the area of access to capital? And after you answer, I will ask Ronaldo as well what the GK Group is doing to facilitate that as well.
And that's a critical area that we have been engaging businesses on locally with respect to access to capital or inability to access capital. It has been a pain point for both small, medium, as well as large enterprises. The small enterprises, which are also critically important, sometimes speak of having a larger portion of challenges in terms of accessing financing from the financial institutions. And sometimes there are challenges which require financial education, which require business education. Oftentimes it's the inability to have small businesses provide the required collateral to the banks or what the banks desire in order to secure on lending to those smaller businesses. So it's really a challenge for developing entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who have recently established their business, but for example, are not able to provide, for example, the financials to the banks that's required to secure on lending or to prove their ability to service the loan. And sometimes what you recognize, it often comes down to the management of their businesses and put in place the required system in order to be able to provide the financial institutions with the level of requirements. But oftentimes too, the challenges with interest rates is also a problem. Businesses not being able to qualify for the funds required, for the capital required in order to invest in businesses because the interest rates oftentimes are also a constraint. And so the discussion needs to continue from both perspectives, from both the business's perspective, as well as a financial institution perspective, from a policy perspective, from government perspective, with respect to how we can make the process less bureaucratic, particularly for small developing businesses, so we can invest in them to grow, because they are really a critical part of the economy and impact the level of sustainability that we want to experience, particularly here in St. Ann, moving forward. So it's really an area of concern and an area that requires continued dialogue.
Right. Renard, I hear the area of concern. A lot of the projects are capital intensive and require some due diligence and a certain amount of bureaucracy. What can you say about that and the ease of doing business in that regard, to access capital?
Right. So how we look at it, is that we have a menu, a wide spectrum of financing that's available to suitable companies. The truth is, within the GK group, we have a commercial bank, First Global Bank, for firms looking to seek, debt capital, and they're set up and they're structured to provide financing for firms, small, medium, and large firms who requires, or who prefers that route. But in addition to that, we also have other pools of capital available that we can tap into. As I said, equity financing is one pool of capital that's available. And we also have pools of capital available for debt financing as well. So oftentimes what it really means, what it really requires is just a discussion, just to enhance that discussion with some of the companies to determine what is the most suitable financing need for them. And as I said, within the GK group, we have enough, the financial group have enough different pools of capital that we can tap into to serve those needs.
Are you open for private equity and joint ventures as well? I mean, is that a possibility that can assist companies that won't be able to do the capital investment all by themselves?
You're right. That's also a key part of what we do as well, right? So private equity and private capital, or even bringing companies to the market. There's a key aspect of providing capital for companies. So, as I said, what's important sometimes is just to have the conversation, to sit down and discuss with the firm so that we can determine what is the optimal capital structure for them. And those are some of the discussions that we are engaging in with some firms, but I imagine not all firms have the ability to talk to somebody, or not the ability, but have done it yet. Speak with somebody from a GK, from GK to assist with those needs.
Right. Thank you very much. Don, there's a question in the chat. You may have to go back to the slide that shows what sectors of the economy are looking to invest. There's a question from the diaspora in terms of what advice would we give to members of the diaspora interested in investment in critical sectors of the economy? I think the slide that shows what sectors of the economy are looking to step up their investment would guide the member of the diaspora in
Right.
this regard. So maybe if you can bring up the slide quickly, if you could just speak back to it in terms of the sectors that are looking for investment, and that will give the investor, in this case, the clue as to where they should invest.
Right. I think what we're seeing is that if we look at the indications coming out of the first quarter of 2024, we're talking about the services sector, which is an extremely broad sector. We're talking about, as I indicated, hairdressers, salons, barbershops, small businesses generally. That's an area that has been dynamic over the last couple of years. We showed where, in 2022, this was a leading sector that said there were going to be investment. That dipped in 2023, but is again showing signs that this is a key sector that people want to look at. Beyond that, we're talking about clearly the whole question of the construction sector, which has maintained very consistent levels of interest, consistent across the years. And then we're talking about obviously things like the tourism sector, of course, which is considered part of the services sector. So those are the 2 or 3 key areas that people are looking at. Above and beyond that, there are some areas that are kind of very inconsistent in terms of the patterns that are being displayed. But those 3 would be the ones that we need to look at very carefully and quickly.
Right. So the message to the investor is contact your investment banker for the opportunities, maybe through private equity, through mutual funds, possibly. Thank you very much. All right, very quickly, we have a Vox Pop, some clips that Affinity put together for us, interviewing people on the street about their current financial situation and what they foresee happening in the near future. Just to sort of add a little endorsement to some of what Don's survey showed up. So I'll just ask quickly Affinity team to just show that video for us right now, and we can do a wrap up.
No, sir.
Yes, I am.
I am, definitely am.
No, not at all. Not one bit.
This year, I'm in a better position this year, yes. Yeah, this year. Alright, the starting of the year is not bad for me. You understand? So I'm not going to say it is bad. It's good so far.
To be honest, I think it's going a little bit better. I mean, that's about like 5% better than the previous year before COVID and etc. Let me give thanks.
Well, this year is terrific so far. Last year was a very hectic year because you don't know, it was a returning after the COVID and everything have to reschedule and get a different light and bring back clientele and stuff like that. So right now this year is starting off, the first quarter of this year is going on well so far. Can't complain.
You want more money?
Well, need wholly more money. We have wholly more money and we have wholly more money, that's it.
Well, at this point in time, I am acting in a position as a manager. So if it is that I'm not acting anymore, on the stage, then I'll definitely be in a better position. Last year, I was in a temporary position, sometimes work, so it's definitely better now, because at least I have a more permanent thing now.
Well, you need a better pay, a better work environment for everybody, and we need because you have some workplaces will have benefits while some don't. So we need that in every workplace. Where every workplace has benefits, so you come to work and you're glad for one to work. But some workplaces like you get up in the morning, if you go down by the time you reach at the gate, you're sick. Because the money not good at the bag of work today. So yeah.
I wouldn't mind getting an increase in this salary because I know that there is gonna be like an increase in the pharmacy salary or the wages, but I think overall, aside from the increase in salary, I think there should be a reduction in the
amount of taxes we pay, and I know that the government is saying something about increasing the the income tax threshold from I think 2.5 million to 3, so that would also help in the amount of tax that comes out of our salary.
It based on my effort, because if I don't push out the work, there's no inheritance to that. So I would say yes, and I'm determined enough to make it go forward. So yeah.
Yes, 100%.
And why?
Because the things them is good, and people spend money on good things. That's the thing. All right.
So good.
Interestedly, it's nice for improvement this year for our business, because we are also catering for the tourism, and a lot of tourists is coming to Jamaica this year. So we're getting a lot of money rotating in the island like that. So it's more better off now. So we're expecting towards the summer a lot of improvement to be happening in the business.
Thank you very much. There you have it. The sentiment of the man in the street. The retail investor, the retail customer, and the persons in the fast-moving consumer goods business. They have some amount of optimism, probably more than what your survey showed. They seem relatively more optimistic. Although our consumer confidence levels are generally not yet back at 2019, but getting pretty close. So I think that does mirror what you have presented. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are at that point now where we need to wrap up. We want to definitely thank you, Don Anderson, for the presentation. As we go forward, we are going to highlight different areas of our economy to focus on, and we will use the huge database of information that you have to guide those presentations going forward. So thank you very much for a very good presentation. Very insightful. Want to also thank our sponsors, GK Capital Management, for the excellent input in the events today. Certainly to Kareem Tomlinson, Managing Director, GK Investments, for your welcome and opening remarks. To Mr. Renaldo Thompson, VP Investment Management and Research, GK Capital Management. To Dr. Ransford Davison, President of the St. Anne Chamber of Commerce, for your very insightful participation as well. And of course, Managing Director Chas E. Ramson, Mr. Philip Ramson, President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. We thank you all so much for your participation. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to the results of the second quarter, which we will share with you in early July. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.